Welcome to Chat DPS, where this week the team will be exploring and making comment upon the People's Call Centre and what it's all about. We also take a look at what Scott Farquhar has to say at the National Press Club recently, addressing AI and productivity. Both really big topics, and we're looking forward to getting into that conversation. Welcome, Adam. Welcome, Robert. Um, so let's start off with the People's Call Centre. This was quite an amusing way to sort of like pick up my week anyway. So the People's Call Centre is a collaborative effort primarily associated with scammer payback, in inverted commas, I guess, and other scam betas to fight against scammers. Um, Now, and this to me was really fascinating because it quite clearly the morals and ethics come into play in it, right? But it involves a large group of volunteers who dedicate their time to disrupt and expose scam call centers. And they achieve this by wasting scammers' time, reporting them and preventing potential victims from falling prey to their schemes. If we've been at all concerned about falling moral and ethical standards, here is a group of young people that are really tech savvy and committed to making life hard for scammers. Adam, this was the one that caught your eye quite clearly, and there is some attraction to this, right? What's your play on this? Because I was fascinated.
So it's quite an interesting idea. There's been on YouTube a growing number of YouTube channels now that are particularly centered around breaking scammers business just apart from general. And the People's Call Center is something that's happened now for a couple of years, and it literally pulls all these people together. The people that are on the phone doing social engineering to try and understand more about the scammers or keep them on the line, all the way through to actual hackers that are getting into their systems to mess with them. Some of these channels will even manage to get into like their CCTV system and have them watch the scammers while they're speaking to them on the phone, those type of things. So it's quite interesting on how it's done. It's kind of like doing a DDoS on live crime at any given time. It's quite interesting to see how it goes through. But they have such moral clarity in what they're doing. And our governments will debate regulations about what's happening, but these kids are just out there doing something. It's absolute chaos, but it's ethical chaos. So I think it's great.
What I liked about it was the moral outrage that just sort of like came through. It was a fascinating thing to watch, and like I say, these guys are really technically excellent, and sort of like they know their technology really well, and actually going to work against the people that are doing damage to the industry. I think this is a fascinating point. Robert, was there a legal point around this that I heard? About the fact that sort of like going back against them again is that a problem? Do you think? I mean, the scamming the scammers.
There is. I mean, I'll probably hand it back to Adam because I think he mentioned something. I'm not across it, but I think there are some laws. I don't know which countries it applies to, where there is laws against hacking back against the hackers or hacking back against the scammers. Maybe Adam can fill us in on that one.
Yeah, so the laws here in Australia, but also in Europe, and also in the US, funnily enough, it states that any attack on infrastructure you don't own is illegal and is an attack. So therefore, whether it's being utilized for something bad, like this case, the scammers, or not, if you do attack it and it's not yours, you are in the wrong.
What a muddle! But I mean, I mean, one would hope that sort of like the law authorities as they stand would be more empathetic towards the people that are actually trying to do some good rather than the people that are doing bad. It's ironic that the people that are doing bad are protected by the same laws. It's
But
crazy.
that's what the law is for, right? It's for everybody.
It is for everybody. You're correct, and that's correct. Okay, so moving on a little bit. Robert, this one caught everybody's eye when Scott Farquhar stood up at the National Press Club just recently and was talking about when top technology shifts happen. Small initial advantages can compound over time into unassailable leads. This one caught my attention for the fact that last week we were talking about, sort of like what was going on in the US with their new paper around AI and the race that what we called it a space race, I think, into AI between the US and China. And he's claiming that this works as much for countries as it does for organizations. Yeah. Or the other way around, in fact, it works for organizations in the same way as it works for countries, I guess. Australia has the talent, the energy, the values, and strategic position to lead, he says. But we must move now, and we have to move at a pace of technology, not the pace of bureaucracy. So this is akin to the discussion, as we've said, and Australia should create digital embassies to be the data center hub for Southeast Asia. He went on claiming that we need to ensure governments aren't the bottleneck by creating digital agents for every government interaction. And some other key points were the fact that we're very comfortable using energy and power for physical work. We need to get comfortable using energy and power for knowledge work. There are some really interesting points here because the vision is quite clear. But when you pitch it against what the US was saying and what the Chinese are doing, it seems to be, quite a different kind of look and feel. There's some very, sort of like massive ideas in it, big, hairy, audacious goals, I think they would have been called in the old days. But what's your take on this? Because this is a he might understand if you could sort of like paint us a picture of this guy's background a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. So for those who don't know, Scott Farquhar, co-founder of Atlassian, it's probably the largest Australian tech company, listed on I think it's New York Stock Exchange, worth billions. The guys, so Farquhar and Mike Cannon-Brookes are worth billions, and started off in Sydney. Scott stepped down from Atlassian about a year ago. Is off doing other things, including he's the head of the Tech Council of Australia. And so that's like an industry body made up of a cross section of tech leaders, and they give advice, consult with government. And so, in this role as head of the Tech Council, he gave this speech at the National Press Club, and it foreshadows a white paper that the Tech Council will put out shortly, and I guess that'll be there for discussion, and there'll be some engagement with government on that. That's the background, and I think the main thrust of his argument was. We're on the cusp of a new industrial revolution, and so we've kind of heard this before with this sort of technology. So it's nothing new in terms of there's an urgency to sort of get ahead and invest in this technology. I think the key sort of contrast, and we'll go into some of the detail because there's some interesting things in there. The key contrast, I think, between the US action plan on AI, which is very much, you can almost hear USA being chanted in the background as you kind of read through it. It's big and bold, and look, I mean, I'm probably going to be a little bit, there's probably going to be a little hyperbole when I talk about it, but if you can imagine with the US, they're going to be clearing national parks and building data centers and building coal-fired power stations and excellent to power them. Nothing will get in the way of them investing in AI and the infrastructure around it as they engage in this AI space race with China. You look at the Australian version, and it's like, okay, look, we're not going to be leaders in developing these sorts of models. We just do not have the capability or the capacity to match what OpenAI and Anthropic and the others are doing. So let's look at a different angle. And like I mentioned, because they're a advisory body to government, this is not government led. This is advisory body led. They're going to present a white paper. Government's going to have a look at that. And yes, they've been sort of developing their own AI action plan, but it could be years before we actually see any action out of the government in implementing any of this, by which time the US-China space race will be, pushing ahead. And a couple of years in with this sort of technology, Australia are going to fall massively behind. So that's the kind of, I guess, the general kind of compare contrast between the two. But if we want to look at some of the points, and we'll see how long we've got in terms of timing. But so let's talk about Scott's first point was about making Australia the data center hub of Southeast Asia, and I think there was a couple of things there. One was, and you guys could probably comment on this more than I could. One was that he said that Australia is really good at building and running data centers, and compared to other places in Southeast Asia, so there's an advantage there. But with that comes massive investment. You have to build the data centers. You've got to build power infrastructure. That's a massive thing. Now, Scott would argue that there's access to huge amounts of renewable energy. Mike Cannon-Brookes is trying to build a renewable energy company that supplies Singapore. So there's maybe something going on there in terms of between the Atlassian co-founders. So water's an issue as well. Australia is a pretty dry continent, so you need a lot of water for the cooling as well. So there's a lot that goes into the infrastructure here. The other side of it that you mentioned was this idea of digital embassies, and so that concept is that take a country like Japan. You can build a data center for Japan in Australia, and that would work under the laws of Japan. So it will be protected like a traditional embassy, and whatever was going on in that data center in terms of the data going in and out will be protected by Japanese law. And what Scott mentioned was that he cited Estonia. So I think it was back in about 2007, Estonia got hacked by Russia, and it brought down a whole bunch of government services. And so in response to that, they did a deal with Luxembourg, and they built data centers in Luxembourg, which are under Estonian law. And essentially, it's the backup for Estonia is centered in Luxembourg. So you can kind of see it work. You can kind of see it working, perhaps as like Australia could be the backup for these countries, backup data centers. That might be something that these countries are interested in. I don't know, because when you think about sort of the different sort of the main data center companies in Australia, NextDC, AirTrunk, some of them are building data centers all around the country. AirTrunk seems to be building data centers all around Southeast Asia. So I'm not quite sure which model's gonna win. But yeah, it's almost like keen for your thoughts on, can Australia actually become the center for data centers in Southeast Asia?
I think, Adam, if you've got an initial thought on this, because obviously I've worked in data centers for years, but I mean, I mean, the CISO view of it would be enormous in this particular.
Yeah, look, it's very interesting. How do you manage international law within within the confines of another country? Those types of issues will be quite good. This also leads to a really interesting point that Australia is not really set up well to fund and build innovation. So for innovative companies that come out, if you're in the US or you're in Israel or you're in Europe, you can find funding for that new idea and to build up that thing. You use AI as the example here. If someone wants to build a whole new model and has an idea of how to do that, getting the funding anywhere else around the world is available. Whereas here in Australia, it's actually unavailable, it's almost impossible without some very particular connections to be able to get enough money to build on these things. So I think like NextDC you mentioned before, I've worked there, fantastic company. They have this vision of having Southeast Queensland, Southeast Asia, and running all the data for everything, and they make fantastic data centers. So like having the ability to do it, I think we absolutely do. I just think the vehicles to get new companies and innovations out is something that our government's lacking right now, and that's not a conversation they're having yet.
Yeah, there's a load of data center players that are right in the thick of all of this. I mean, locally we've got Macquarie, my old place at Macquarie. I mean, they build superb data centers. They're big data centers. Lots going on. You've brought out, Robert, about AirTrunk and what's going on at NextDC. And NextDC have invested heavily in this whole tier four approach to design and what have you. Um, I tend to agree, though, the ability for us to build more and more data centers. The mistake I think that Australia is making in my own head is the fact that we're building them all in the same place. So there's lack of diversity. So the Sydney Basin is just absolutely chock a block with 100 megawatt data centers hither and thither, and that they should be sharing that whole workload in other sort of areas, and potentially more regional areas. Not necessarily Brisbane, but I'm talking about putting them out into the out into the wilderness a little bit more as well. How you get the power out there is another question altogether, but it's not beyond the wit of man to be able to work out how to do that. But you need a strategy around power to begin with, and that's obviously quite clearly what's lacking at this moment in time. And Robert, yeah, you can't run a data center without water.
Yeah.
It's kind of essential.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
some big challenges there. I might just maybe invite us a deep dive on one other point, and then we can maybe skim the others. But the other one was about fixing outdated copyright laws, which is a kind of a reasonable point. So basically, in the US. They have this concept of fair use, and there's been a couple of interesting cases that have been brought against. The main one was against Anthropic, and I think there was a case against Meta as well. And there's been some decisions there recently which says that basically the way they've been training their LLMs on huge data sets of available information, books, images, whatever it might be, a court has ruled that Anthropic using those materials is fair use and therefore protected. And so what Scott Farquhar was saying is that Australia should mirror the US in terms of having this concept of fair use, and he rightfully made the point that this has been looked at for a number of years, probably more than a decade, by the Australian Law Commission and others. So it's been looked at in terms of introducing it. I mean, my question would be is that even if you did introduce this concept of fair use, he talked about, I think he may have mentioned, or it's been discussed, that this is gonna unlock investment because you don't have to worry about training models within Australia. But I think a little bit like we've sort of touched on, Australia is not going to lead the world in LLMs. I know that there's clearly startups working on building Australian-based LLMs, but really, I don't think it's going to shift the dial very much if we change those copyright laws. I think what's interesting in that whole kind of IP space is that so while going after the Anthropics and OpenAIs is not going to get you anywhere in terms of how they train their models, you are seeing some of the media companies going after the likes of Midjourney, so Disney, for example, and saying that you can't be producing images of Mickey Mouse, doing weird things or something. It's I think it's just an example. So that sort of thing is going to be interesting to see how cases like that play out, because it's one thing to take a huge amount of data and turn it into something else which might be useful, that transformative nature of it. It's another thing to take a well-known copyrighted protected image and put it into situations which Disney or whoever would never put it into. And so there's some interesting IP battles going on. But yeah, so this one about trying to fix outdated copyright laws, not sure if it's really going to say shift the dial in terms of investment into generative AI or building AI types of companies. I don't know what anyone else's thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Pistol fire into the air, cannons at 20 paces, and off they go. And we're very much more diligent and putting the guardrails.
Yeah.
Imagine if we could build an export industry of megabytes.
what's fair and equal. And maybe that's something that we all need to
Yes.
sort of like start thinking about a little bit more in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it. Gentlemen, that was Chat DPS for this week. Thank you so much for the contribution. It
Yeah.
was a great
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation. I think we've gone over
That was a
time,
good.
but
That was a
thank
good
you so much
tagline. Yeah.
for your time.
Mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And look, I mean, look, just to touch on the other things, some of these other points was really about getting governments to increase the amount of APIs for their government services, and get government to be using AI on a daily basis, so that they get used to it, they adopt it more. So again, it's something that it kind of sounds good when it's spoken, but putting it into practice and getting through all that red tape, it's clearly going to take a long time. I mean, if we look at, just to, meander off, like privacy law reform, we've been talking about it for years, and this is now a government that's, it's got another term, and could have a term on top of this, and we're still waiting for privacy law reform. So goodness knows when they're going to get around to, an AI action plan, and actually putting that into practice. So I think that's the big concern, that, and again, I'll come back to that contrast between the US and Australia. US, going gung ho as you would expect. Australia, it's sort of typically conservative, taking a sort of very kind of small role in this. But yeah, I think it's watch this space, but don't expect too much.